Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Licensing as an Exit Strategy webinar. This webinar is organized by the Program Manager's Office of the European Innovation Council, and all projects or all beneficiaries who've ever got a grant from the European Innovation Council have been invited to this event. It has been developed under the leadership of the Program Manager for Health, Jordanos Arsimanoglu, and Robert Casals and Manuel da Costa Lindo from the support office of the unit. My name is Annemarie Sasse. I'm the head of unit of the Program Manager's Office, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this event. I wanted to explain you first the agenda, how we've seen that the 2.5 hours will be taking place. So we first have a presentation by Jordanos Arsimonoglu, the Program Manager on Health and Biotechnology, who will explain the purpose and the objectives of this event. This is a follow-up of a previous event, but now we will go further and he will explain why this is necessary. And then we have two parts of the session of today. The first one are presentations, where we are having people with a lot of experience in licensing technology and earning money with it in different domains. So we will have a 10-minute presentation of each of the speakers that we have, and they will always explain also 2 or 3 cases that they have lived in real life, and that they can serve as an inspiration for you, and hopefully they speak to you in terms of the type of characteristics of these cases. So we have cases in the domain of health, in the domain of agri-food, also in the digital domain, and in the green tech or clean tech technology domain. So each of the speakers will talk 10 minutes, and after that there is the possibility for you to ask 1 question. And then the second part of the session, we will have a panel discussion where you can really ask all the questions that you have, and the panelists will try to answer them in the best way possible. If there are, normally we would like to end the panel discussion at 16:45 with the main findings that we've heard, and a wrap up of the session, again done by Jordanos Arsimanoglu. But in case you have many questions, we can still extend the session a bit until 5:30. So you should write your questions in the chat, and we will monitor the chat and then answer the questions the best possible. And I also want to remind you that this session will be recorded. So if we go to the next slide, Jenny. Yes. Then on this slide, you can see the speakers that we have. And I'm very proud of all the experience that we have gathered here, and that accepted our invitation to explain to you how they are doing licensing. Because it's really a very, very rich experience. So we have a speaker from the US, one from Canada, and then we also have 3 from Europe. So you will get really a worldwide view on licensing. So the first speaker that we have, it's John Osmopoulos, and he's a Senior Associate Director in the Tech Transfer and Industry Collaboration Department at Tufts University in Massachusetts, where he's primarily responsible for inventions from the life sciences. His background is in molecular biology, but now already since years, he manages all aspects of the technology transfer process from faculty outreach to evaluation of invention disclosures, marketing, negotiation, and agreements. John was also our guest in the previous licensing webinar that we had, and we're very happy that he wants to join us again. Our second speaker will be from Canada. It will be Alicia Main and Sambi Kamaldeep. And they have sent a video because in their case it was still night now, so they could not be present in real life. But Alicia, she works for the W.J. van Dusen Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship within the Simon Fraser University's BD School of Business. She was the founding educational coordinator for New Ventures BC, a community to help British Columbia startups to grow. She has a degree in materials engineering, and her focus will be more on deep tech technologies and her examples. So in her video, she will be joined by Mr. Sambi Kamaldeep, and he's the Director of Technology Licensing and the IP Council at the Simon Fraser University in Canada. And he's an IP lawyer, primarily focused on leading a team at Simon Fraser University to spark innovation and help guide researchers on paths to IP commercialization. So you see, all these speakers really have an experience by bringing research to the market, exactly the same as what EIC is also trying to achieve. And then our next speakers, they will be from Europe. And then in particular, we have two speakers from Spain. The first one is Xana Velastigui. And Xana is a partner at DNA Advisory Services, which focuses on business solutions in the agri-food industry. And she's also a general partner and investment committee member at the Swan Lab Venture Factory that invests in leading Spanish agri-food companies. So she has more than 50 years experience in the agri-biotech sector, and she has led a lot of R&D, intellectual property, regulatory, and product development. So we're very happy that you wanted to join us, Xana, today. And then our fourth speaker will be Mr. Carlos Puente, also from Spain. And he's a co-founder, director, and chief scientist at Fructus SA, where he has been in charge of technology and intellectual property portfolio development since 1999. He's the Chief Technology Office and Intellectual Property Rights Director, and he has developed an antenna technology and a large patent portfolio, which has been massively adopted by the cell phone industry. And his inventions have been licensed to 10 of the top cell phone original equipment manufacturers worldwide. We're very proud that you are with us today, Carlos, and that you want to share also your advice to our projects. So Carlos will be talking about the telecommunications domain. So he will be representing the ICT sector. And then our last speaker in the first part of the event, it will be Mr. Thomas B. Reuter. And he's a certified licensing professional working at the European Patent Office. And he's working in the Innovation Support Program. And he has 20 years of experience in the international commercialization of early stage technology. He will be more general, looking at IP and advising how to do licensing. And he will nicely complement the speeches of the other speakers that we had. So then we have also with us Lilian Volkan, and she will participate in the panel in the second part of our event. She's a research associate of University of Oxford, so she will explain the UK experience for us. And she's also an agri-tech professional, and she's helping inventors, startups, and businesses of all sizes to use their entrepreneurial capacity to turn their IP into income-producing products. So also a warm welcome to you, Lilian. With this, I want to hand over to our first speaker, which is Danos, who will give the purpose of this event.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. A warm welcome to all speakers and panelists from me as well. We are delighted to have you here, and to all the people that are attending this webinar. I'd like to make only 3 points as an introduction. The first one is why, what is the purpose of this event? And I just remember of 12 years ago, I was coming from the biofield. I was, of course, following the nature of biotechnology. And I remember that many articles coming from the US describing the different types of deals. And in particular, having a lot of emphasis on the licensing deals. And I was always wondering, after having been as a researcher for many years, why all this emphasis? And that was 15 years ago, 12 years ago. So the understanding is that although we are very good in research and our efforts for commercializations are picking up in licensing, which is what we are aiming at the end with the different technologies that EIC is supporting. We're not that good, and we need to really intensify and get more knowledge and more experience. This is exactly in line with the scope of today's webinar. To learn more about actual cases, not academic approach. We want to know the process well, but we would like to learn more about how the job is done, to say it in a more plain, with more plain words, if I can say. The different secrets, the different tips, what needs the researcher, and for the perspective from the researcher, from the investor, and all that will be described by our speakers. The second point I'd like to raise and share with you is why we're having a second edition. As Anne-Marie said, this is the second edition, and the reason is we realized from the feedbacks that the beneficiaries, the EIC beneficiaries, they really enjoyed the new knowledge, and they interacted and they sent messages to our speakers of the first edition that was only in the biotech sector. And one of those is John Cosmopoulos is with us, and he can also, he's welcome to add his comments on that. And another speaker was the VP Alliances from BioNTech, that he received at least 20, as according to what he told me, requests from different companies. So we realized that there was quite a feedback and interaction as a result of the first edition. And the logical thing to do is to expand that to all other sectors that EIC is supporting. This is what prompted us to organize this webinar, and we are very excited about that. We work in one sector, and now we are expanding to all other sectors, sharing the same type of experiences, which I believe is missed to some extent. It's very much needed. And the third and final comment is, how does that fit to the ecosystem of EIC? As you know, EIC is supporting heavily the efforts from very early stages to late stages. And if you just browse the EIC website, you'll realize that we have different tools and different types of support other than the funding support. So today's webinar is part of what we call the non-funding support. And EIC is getting stronger and stronger in the strategic intelligence that we put behind the different types of support we provide, again, outside of funding, to our beneficiaries. I would ask you to see today's event as part of that. And the insights and the inputs from the speakers is part of the strategic intelligence that EIC would like to infuse and would like to support, and would like that to stimulate our beneficiaries to learn about how the licensing job is done, because this is going to be the end point of the development of their technology. And with these 3 points, once again, I'm delighted with our speakers today. I would like to pass the floor to John Cosmopoulos. The second time, as Anne-Marie just said. So, John, the floor is yours.
I just realized I was muted, so I will start all over again. Um, so, hello everyone. I am John Cosmopoulos. I am with the Technology Transfer Office at Tufts University. I'd like to thank the organizers, Anne-Marie Sesson and Iordanis Arzimanoglu, for the honor and privilege of presenting at today's event and sharing my experiences with you. Um, as was mentioned, I am this is the second time I am presenting at one of your workshops, and find the events interesting and exciting to take part in. I'm particularly um, uh, happy to see that Yordanis is and the other organizers are making this effort to transfer licensing and technology transfer experience and expertise to the beneficiaries of the EIC program. Sort of the technology transfer of the technology transfer, as I think we called it in the June event, which is a critical component, I believe, of the overall research activity and enterprise. So again, thank you to the organizers. My role at Tufts, and we are a mid-sized university in the Boston area. We have about 10 people in the office. Most of us are multidisciplinary. We have a few specialized people like in-house attorneys. Um, and our role is, we call it cradle to grave. We do all of the activities around technology transfer, from faculty outreach, faculty education, faculty workshops, to identifying and evaluating inventions, to promoting and marketing inventions, one-on-one, cold calls, conferences, partnering meetings, presentations, using our networks, building networks, going to focused events, industry events, and the list goes on. And beyond that, it's business development, to pushing the project, to trying to create a deal, craft a deal, um, negotiate the deal terms, and ultimately, hopefully, close the deal. And then the work, of course, doesn't stop. Of course, in between, we have a lot of patent management, patent filings, patent strategy, and then, of course, once you close the deal, there's the work doesn't stop. It's the alliance management. In fact, that's a very big part of the overall role. So we are business development professionals. That's how we see ourselves, focusing on the translation, commercialization of early stage inventions. So I was asked in my time to give you some examples of uh, technology transfer projects that are in healthcare, that are early stage of development, to give you a perspective on um, what are the key drivers of success, and success meaning closing the deal. From our perspective. And of course, then we pass on the baton to someone else who is responsible for the next steps. I mean, ultimate success is the product reaches the market, the university is paid royalties and other fees, and those fees come back to the university, and a good share is shared with the inventors, and the balance goes to the university at various levels to support the university, and ultimately go back into supporting the research enterprise and supporting faculty, facilities that will then create the next layer generation of innovations, and hopefully create a virtuous cycle. Our role is to complement the research enterprise. We don't change it. We don't try to tell people, faculty, to not do what they are trained to do, what the culture is to do. We fit the patent process to the publication process. We would never tell anyone not to publish. We don't keep trade secrets. If necessary, we file patent applications early, because that's people are going to publish or go to conferences. So we fit in and we complement the regular academic process, but bring in our expertise to endeavor to capture the commercial potential, and make sure it happens, make sure meetings happens, follow up on all of those things. Um, so um, the example I'm going to mention is, in fact, it's one lab, one principal investigator, but who runs a very large operation, 30 people, uh, and in his group, and has a multitude of projects. And this is sort of fresh off the press. We signed the deals in October and December of last year, and January. Um, and I can't mention names because there's no press releases, but I'll give you the important gist. So we have one faculty member who is really at the forefront of his field, and he's a computer scientist plus biologist who works in developmental biology, and he's been studying for 20 years. He's been studying, or more. He's been studying the role of bioelectric communication in development, and then going beyond that, taking it in health. And so he has projects in cancer around not killing cancer cells, but normalizing cancer cells by altering their bioelectric communication patterns. The cancer cells may die or may not die, but um, but that's not the point. The point is sort of to normalize the abnormal cellular communication. He has projects around sort of reactivating growth patterns in organs or limbs. He's regrowing limbs, severed limbs, um, and of course the outcome is not yet perfect, but it's a process. Um, he and so we were approached by an entrepreneur investor who um, and we worked with that who had a very broad interest in this scientist projects, but didn't want to pick one. Sort of realized that it's at the early stage, um, and wanted to follow more of a portfolio approach. And so what we did was we developed essentially a small fund, a small investment fund, um, $15 million. Um, to invest in projects in this lab only, um, with this scientist. And the idea is not the idea. The agreement is that then the fund has an exclusive option to anything um, coming out of that lab in the areas that's funded. So we start off by deciding on the amount. We've then decided on research topics. There's 9 research topics within the purview of this agreement, and the funder has the right to add one more to bring it up to 10, and then um, we also negotiated a very sort of elaborate and sort of clear-cut option terms um, around intellectual property that results that's developed during the funding period, with funding from this investor, and the fund has the right to take a license to that intellectual property. We've also added some background IP into the mix, which is necessary to commercialize the foreground IP, and we've also pre-negotiated licensing terms, the key licensing terms, the financial, some of the definitions for the future licenses. The projects are in the anti-aging space, diagnostics, devices, health software, could be new drugs, and also repurposing drugs, um, known drugs. And in fact, we signed this agreement in October, and we are already sort of working on the first startup company. So that resulting from this interaction. So the idea was to, and besides everything else, this has the benefit of managing the interface. So only having one investor, a small number, and then that investor and that fund would be responsible for downstream development and commercialization of IP. And um, and it also helps manage the interface with the scientist, because he only has so much time. He wouldn't be able to sit in the boards or advise 15 startup companies, but he can advise the fund, and the fund will then take sort of one entity, and then would would manage the downstream process. And of course, the company is in the process, the investment fund is in the process of raising additional funds for the downstream activities, for the commercialization, for setting up the startup companies, for funding those startup companies, finding personnel, and so on. We're also interacting a lot with lab members, because the most logical founding scientists for the companies are the postdocs and senior grad students, PhD students in the lab. So we're working on that process. We'll probably develop a training program for them as well. And that's one more way to achieve the sort of the technology transfer, as I call it, of the technology transfer. So I think I'm almost up for time. I'll pause here. I think I heard that there's time for one question at this stage, and of course, questions later on and through the chat box. So I'll pass the baton back to, I guess, Jordanis.
For the time being, there are no questions in the chat box. So Jordanis, the floor is yours.
If there are no questions, then I have a very quick question for you, John, because I was really stunned by what you described. So in a way, you created a fund, tailor-made to this lab. Is that like dedicated for this lab, this investor of 50 million?
Yes. 15. 15 is for the sponsored research only. Of course, the amounts that would be invested in the companies, each portfolio company
and
could multiply that.
The scientist accepted to have only one investor in his lifetime, and that's it. And you can get along with him, and that's he agreed on that. Is it?
Well, we have certain safeguards. It's actually not for lifetime. It is a 5-year process, and
Okay.
we did agonize a lot about what happens if we don't like them anymore. But when you make these deals, you have to make the bet up front. So we decided we like them enough to make a 5-year commitment.
We can see one question in the chat.
Yes. How did you measure the background knowledge of the lab in this agreement?
How do I measure the background?
Not sure.
I'm not sure I follow the question. So clearly, this is a very productive lab, and there's an enormous amount of publications and general know-how, and that's what brought these investors to the table. So perhaps that's and we do have some background IP, but meaning a few patent applications. But this is mostly based on just the strength of the research of this lab, the publications, in fact.
Okay. Thank you, John.
This is a group that publishes, 20, 25 papers a year, just to give you an example.
So it's a model I've never heard before. I don't know about other attendees. That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing this information. So now we need to move to the second presentation by Alicia Main. That's recorded presentation. We are getting there. Your patience is.
There's no sound, everybody.
Yeah.
No, I don't hear anything yet.
Could you see the video or?
We saw it, but it was not with sound. You have to share with sound somehow.
Yeah. The problem is that someone entered with made
It's
him.
shared with the volume.
Excuse me.
Please give it another try, and if for any reason, then we move to the next presentation, and until then it will be sorted out. So
Yeah.
please give it. Let's
It
try.
was with sound. We tested.
Okay.
It's shared with the sound.
Okay.
Since
I
the
know
audience
how
is
to do
kindly
it.
asked for 2 more minutes, and then
Just give us 1 second. Robert, can you
Yes.
try yourself? I will mute everyone.
How to share now? Yeah, that's what I did. Share computer. Okay.
Tech, biomedical, and hello, I'm Alicia Main, the Van Dusen Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada. After an education in materials engineering and technology management, I've been researching science innovation for 23 years with a focus on the commercialization of research in the advanced materials, nanotech, biomedical, and clean energy fields. I became Simon Fraser University's first Associate Vice President of Knowledge Mobilization and Innovation in order to create and strengthen the systems to better support science innovation at our university and in our region and our country. One of the best decisions I made was in hiring the director of our reimagined technology licensing office, who will introduce himself next.
Thank you, Professor Main. Hi, I'm Kamaldeep Singh Sambi, the Director of Technology Licensing and IP Legal Counsel here at SFU. I studied electrical engineering in undergrad and followed that up with a legal education law school in Ottawa, Canada. I focused on intellectual property as my specialty. After practicing in Canada for about 5 years, I moved to Silicon Valley, California. Over there, I worked for some of the biggest multinational companies such as Apple and Google and learned how they manage their IP portfolios. Following this, as Professor Main mentioned, I joined SFU to lead their technology licensing office. And together with Professor Main, we aim to create an innovation ecosystem with aligned incentives that serve all our researchers. I will turn it back to Professor Main to continue this talk.
Thank you, Cam. So I mentioned that my research is on science innovation and enhancing the commercialization of advanced materials, biomedical, and clean energy inventions. Along with my co-authors, 2 of whom are shown here, I publish my research in nature journals, as well as in innovation management journals, because I want our research to reach scientists. And IP strategy is a key part of our research, as patents and their licensing are frequently pivotal to breakthrough science research getting out into the world, creating impact. The case study we will describe today is that of a leading chemist who has been at the top of his field for over 30 years. Professor Stephen Holdcroft is a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Electrochemical Materials, an internationally respected researcher and the co-founder of Ionomer Innovation, a venture found to help create impact from the novel membranes developed in the Holdcroft lab. As many of you are likely familiar with, commercializing breakthrough research, be that a new therapeutic or a novel form of clean energy generation or storage, can take decades. First, and of critical importance, is the breakthrough research itself. In the case of Professor Holdcroft, that is research enabling novel anion exchange membranes and novel proton exchange membranes. But as this timeline shows, the fundamental materials research often happens 10 to 20 years before that research gets out into the world in the form of novel products or processes. That is where IP strategy becomes critically important. As you can see in this figure, there were several streams of novel research that the Holdcroft lab patented, continue to develop with translational grants and with industry. And 2 of those streams, the ones on the top, led to the formation and growth of Ionomer Innovations. The actions and strategy of the researchers themselves, the University Technology Licensing Office, and the innovation supports of the university are critical to the future path of commercialization. Because the breakthrough research, the papers we publish, and the number of patents we are granted are important, but not sufficient. Therefore, it is the focusing that we do through entrepreneurial capabilities of matching our technology inventions to existing or emerging market needs, and the formation of IP strategy that enable commercially valuable assets for any science-based venture or licensing transaction. And the researchers play an essential role in that. In the case of Ionomer, one of the PhD students in the Holdcroft lab, Ben Britton, was supported by many aspects of our SFU Innovates ecosystem, including taking the Invention to Innovation graduate program, which helped him create a compelling value proposition for their lab, for their breakthrough membrane technology, and helped him to focus on the key performance attributes needed to become better at telling their story and informing their IP strategy. Ben Britton and Professor Steve Holdcroft and 2 other researchers from the Holdcroft lab co-founded Ionomer Innovations in 2016 with the SFU Technology Licensing Office supporting the IP. And the director of our TLO, Cam Sembi, will now tell you about some of the factors that they consider in supporting researchers in this way.
Thank you, Professor Mann. I'd like to speak about 3 or just mainly IP licensing models that may be employed to achieve a broader value creation for research developed in universities. I'm going to cover 3 basic university licensing models and respective considerations for these models. The first of which is Model 1, which you see here. In this model, the university, likely the TTO, will collaborate with the professor to understand the technical novelty of the research. The TTO will then assess and determine the market need, and then both the researcher and the TTO will leverage their networks to find potential discussions and commence discussions with potential licensees. Now, in this model, you can add a layer of sophistication to your licensing approach by considering and being mindful of 3 considerations. The first of which is exclusivity. Will the license be exclusive or non-exclusive? This comes down to whether, if you license to a particular licensee, do they have full control over technology, or could this also be licensed to various other companies? As you can see in the diagram here, if it's non-exclusive, there could be a multitude of companies the same technology could be licensed to. The second consideration I want to talk about are the fields of use. If you have a specific technology, could this be licensed and carved out into a license only for a specific field of use? For example, you have fuel cell technology and you're having discussions with, let's say, a bus company. You want to, let's say, potentially limit the license to the field of use within the transportation sector, leaving the other field of use available for other licenses potentially. The third consideration I want to talk about is the availability of sub-licensing. So if you license to a company, do they have the ability to then sub-license that technology to other companies? And having these considerations from the get-go allow, for an advantage such that you don't jump at the first opportunity. You may not lock yourself into a deal that doesn't allow you to realize the full broader value creation from multiple licensees. Now I want to move over to Model 2. Model 2 is something we see a lot in the clean tech space. This is where it's a preferred model where the university will license the IP to a startup. And investors prefer to see a startup model in certain spaces where they know that they have a dedicated vehicle, namely the company, that is de-risking the technology, and they're further developing R&D. This then serves to incentivize investors to provide funding upon seeing that the IP is licensed to the startup, and it just is a vehicle to attract investment and alliance partners. We get one common question where, should the startup own the IP or should the IP reside with the university? And, this question may be answered by reframing the question in the sense of it may not be centered around ownership, but rather control. And this is where Model 3 comes into use. In this setup, the university can license the IP to the startup, but also giving the startup the ability to sub-license that IP to third parties. In this way, the investor may be appeased by knowing that the startup has an autonomy to create and allow and negotiate with various companies, and having their autonomy to do so without interference, let's say, from the ultimate owner of the IP. Thus, it's kind of a hybrid between models 1 and 2. Moreover, it also allows for the university itself to commercialize the technology outside of the license to the startup. For example, as you can see here, Company 5, that's just a direct relation between the university and this company, while allowing the startup to make its own deals with companies 1 through 4. So in these ways, having these 3 models are just adding to, I guess, some foresight before getting into licensing discussions, knowing how to maximize and get a broader creation by allowing to having the technologies to be licensed to multiple parties instead of a singular entity. Now, going back to our case study, we'll take a look at Ionomer. Ionomer has that Model 3 setup, as you can see on the left side, where the university is licensed to the company Ionomer, and Ionomer has the ability to sub-license to various parties. In this situation, they've created 60 plus IP assets that are filed, issued, and licensed with SFU. They've raised $20 million of funding based in part from a strong IP portfolio, and they've been listed as a top clean tech company back to back for the last 2 years. So with that, I'll throw it back to Professor Main to add some closing comments.
So you've taken the first step. You're here at this licensing webinar, which is a great start. We would love to be there with you for the rest of the presentations and the panel discussion, but it's the middle of the night here in Vancouver. So I am wishing you the best in the rest of the discussion, in your commercialization journey. Here are some resources from our talk that may be helpful to you in the next steps. And again, I wish you well, because the world needs your talents and needs your inventions mobilized. And licensing and IP strategy can play an essential part.
Danos, back to you.
Mhm.
It's really a pity that we can have Alicia Main, Professor Main, with us. I found your presentation very stimulating, exactly because some of these concerns are currently, in discussions, in heated discussions, actually in Europe, actually the ownership of the IP and the different licensing models. So you're very welcome to send us questions regarding what was presenting. But the licensing models, I'd like to focus on that, is quite something that we would like. That's our goal, actually, to enrich the knowledge of our beneficiaries on these different types of licensing models. I would like only to add that there are different approaches from European member states. There is not a harmonized European yet approach to who has the ownership of the IP. There are countries like Italy and Sweden. They have their own model, which has the emphasis on the researcher, on the scientist. And there are other approaches for most of the countries where the IP stays with the university. It can be licensed, as we heard in this presentation. So this is quite interesting for what's going to happen in Europe in the next years. And with that comment, I'd like to pass the floor to Zana Bella Stegi. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, let me share the presentation. So I hope you can see it properly.
Yes, it's visible. Yes, thank you.
Great. Great. Okay, well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you here today at the webinar, and thank you very much to the organizers for having me. So I won't go into much detail into into my previous my profile, because already Anne-Marie was introducing ourselves, but I just wanted to let you know that I have a scientific background. I studied biology. I have a PhD in life sciences. Then I moved into a biotech company. I became also part of the founders group of this biotech company that operated in the agriculture sector in Spain. I was there for around 14 years, first more with an R&D managing role, and then with the business development and commercial role for the last years, and very linked to the strategy of the company. And then I moved to DNA, where I am doing a lot of support, giving a lot of support to different type of companies, startups, corporates, and also investors on business strategy and business development, and also involved in a new project that is, as Anne-Marie was mentioning, a fund focused in the ag sector, in the ag food sector. So having said that, I would like to start saying that, I mean, we are talking about many different sectors today, and the agri-food or the ag food sector is, in my view, a sector that is very complex in the sense of the type of innovation that you can find along the different parts of the chain value, because you can start from innovation in seed or inputs or agtech for farm control, moving into specific production processes like fermentation, going into specific ingredients, formulation, adjuvants, and finally innovation that maybe is closer to the consumer, like intelligent packaging, for example, no? And then everything transversal, like is digitalization and the management of the waste that is coming across the different stages of the value chain. So there is a very big mix of potential technology products, etc., that can be a matter of licensing in this sector. In my view, and before commenting some examples about license cases, there are some aspects that for me are very relevant to take into account when you are thinking on licensing. Could be technology products, whatever that you are thinking, and it's on the first stage, business strategy and the business model, that of course go together and very linked, and it doesn't matter if we are talking about a technology center or a university that also needs to lay out its strategy for licensing and in specific goals and its model, or if we are talking about a startup or even a corporate that wants to license out some of its technology. We need to think always where I am good at, where is my area of activity, how far I'm going in the value chain, how close to the consumer, or which is my client. No, maybe it's not the final consumer, but is an industry that is going to serve that consumer. That changes a little bit also how I think on the license, and also how profound it needs to be my knowledge in the different chain, in the different parts of the chain value. And also the operational model, in this case more linked to a startup or a company that will also bring other opportunities for licensing, depending if I have my own capacities, for example, for manufacturing or processing or commercializing or distributing, or I don't have them and I need to come into an agreement with other companies or other providers. I might be also licensing there. Okay, so we need to think on the licensing concept as a very broad concept and as an opportunity to help us in different parts of our business. And then innovation and the know-how also come a little bit together. It's not the same when you are setting the base for a license agreement. If your innovation is very disruptive and still on an earlier stage, then it might bring more risk, or it is an innovation that maybe is not so disruptive, but in any case has a market and is needed, and you have some specific competitors, and you also need to benchmark with those on the base of that negotiation. Yes, and then when I talk about know-how and IP, and some of the previous speakers were commenting about this, there are many things around the specific patent that you can license, and it's and this can include previous know-how, can include the actual the patent, can include future know-how, can include a specific product, ingredient, active, whatever. So all this has to be taken into account very carefully when you negotiate and you write the license agreement. I will show 3 examples. I won't go in all the detail in all of them, but of course I'm open for questions after. I'm not showing the names because I'm not allowed to. So I will give you the general information about the licensor and the licensee and the general conditions. Okay. First of all is a gene trade license. This was a startup licensing to a seed company, to a seed corporate. The stage of the technology was quite advanced because it had been already validated at field scale for several crops, including the specific crop to which it was going to be licensed, and it had quite an extensive IP around it, granted in several countries, but the IP was not directly owned by the startup, but it had been licensed in from a research group. It was one of the cases that the previous speakers were commenting. So the startup had an exclusive license and could sub-license to other companies. So this is the case. This is what it was doing. One of the very nice things of this agreement was that there was not only an agreement for commercial goal, but there was a previous part of work that needed to be done, that it was a co-development of the product that it was going to be commercialized. And that co-development, apart from bringing a revenue to the startup that was doing some part of that development, in my view, it also gave the startup an opportunity to work with that corporate, learn more about how a corporate was going to take this product to the market, come closer to regulatory aspects, regulatory hurdles, market components. So this brought a closer collaboration and a closer relation between these 2 companies. And that is a very nice benefit from this specific case. Okay, well, the IP cost was assumed always by the startup, and this is another point that you need to take into account. What happens if there is any new IP generated during the agreement? What happens with that? That needs to be negotiated and settled up. Okay, and then, well, the revenue model was quite typical for this type of agreements, with an upfront payment, then a revenue for the activities developed by the startup, and then specific payments for milestones that were achieved by the corporate, advancing through the commercialization, and a specific percentage of royalty. Second example, this is a research group that was licensing to a startup that was going to further develop and commercialize the product. The product was going to be a biopesticide based on active ingredients identified by this research group. And in fact, it was not one only research group, but it was a consortium. So this was a little bit a difficult point at the beginning of the negotiation. It's important to decide who is going to be the person, the licensor, or the representative of the licensor to negotiate the agreement, because probably the company is not going to want to be talking to 3, 4, or 5 different parties. Okay, and also be very sure that you have a good agreement in place that specifies who owns what from that specific know-how, IP, so patent or whatever. Okay. In this case, it was not only, again, a direct commercial agreement, a license as such, but it had 2 phases. One phase was for 1 year. The startup had the option to come into an agreement for the actual license, and during that period, the startup could test and validate the results about the active ingredients and the activity that was claimed in some specific crops. Okay, during this period there was a collaboration between the parties, and the startup had a first right of refusal in case another company came during that time interested in the same technology. Then the parties came into a license agreement in which the startup was going to further develop and commercialize worldwide the product. Okay, in this case, because it was a technology license from a research group, the agreement included that the IP cost was going to be taken over by the startup, and any new IP generated, as it was going to be generated by the startup, will belong to the startup. There was no upfront payment in this case, and the royalty scheme was subject to different scenarios, because, and I come to my previous comment on licensing strategy, the startup could either finish the development, register and commercialize the product, and then arrive, let's say, to almost final consumer, or could develop and sub-license that technology to other companies that could further register and commercialize the product. So depending on how far the startup was arriving, so more risk it was taking and more investment had to do, the percentage of the royalties were varying in return to the research group. Okay, and the final example is this was a microbial strain to be used to produce biostimulants for agriculture, and this was from a startup to an agrochemical corporate. It was on a medium stage of development, and the IP hadn't been granted yet, but it was well, quite complete. In this case, I won't enter into the details of the example. You have the revenue model there. It's quite similar to the gene trade, but in this case, what I would like to comment is sometimes things don't go well, as we were commenting before. Some of the speakers were mentioning also, and is you think that that the agreement will last many years, but in this case there was a conflict because the company was not advancing as fast as the startup was hoping in the development and arriving to the commercialization. So another important point is be sure that you include the specific termination terms and exit options for both sides in order to be able to come out from an agreement that is not working. Okay. So just my last slide with some takeaways would be in the area of the know-how, IP rights, etc. Be careful and be sure about where are you licensing out or in terms of all the know-how and forehand background know-how. What is it for? You might want to narrow the uses or the application or the geography, and which level of control are you going to have around that IP or that knowledge after you sign the agreement. Then when you negotiate, I think that sometimes we need to include some red lines, but it's true that it will depend a lot on the status of your startup, for example, financial, economic, freedom to operate, many things. So you need to think on all those aspects, but also which risk is taking the other part in order to take the technology or the product forward. And as I said, have some exit doors on both sides. And then in relation to the agreement, again, highlight that there are many different ways and moments in which you can license, and those can coexist within one startup. And I think that is, you can take also the license as an opportunity to collaborate, to learn, and to establish fruitful relationships with your partners and your customers. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Zana, for this clear presentation with 3 examples. There is no need now for me to say why we're doing this. I think you proved it. This is the information that is very appropriate for our beneficiaries. And before looking at the first question, I'd like to say, for instance, the example you said that we are having consortia here at the EIC, right? Mm-hmm. So the people participating in the consortia, they need to understand, as you pointed out, that it's going to be one. The transaction between licensee and licensor is going to be with only one in the end. So very important to take care of that from the beginning. also the importance of the ability to be able to sub-license something. All these things you are very clear in your presentation, and this is the added value that the knowledge you are sharing with our beneficiaries. Thank you for that. So, is there any question?
Nope.
Not yet.
There's
No questions so far.
It needs to be digested, Sana, because it's information. Thank you very much. So the next speaker, I'll pass the floor now to Carlos Puente. Carlos, the floor is yours.
Hi there. Yes, let me share my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
You can see my slides now. Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me to this talk. My name is Carlos Puente. I'm a professor at Barcelona Tech, at the Polytechnic University of Catalunya in Barcelona. And I'm also a founder of two technology companies. One is called Fractus, that was founded in 1999. And the second is Ignion, who was founded in 2015, both in the field of telecommunications, in the field of antenna technology for wireless and mobile communications in general. So today I would like to frame my discussion, my presentation in particularly in three aspects. Two of them will be two examples of companies that have been successful in licensing their technologies and patents to the market. I will frame this discussion mostly in the telecoms electronics industry, which is, as we will see, quite different from the biotech, chemical, pharma industry. And also the third point I would like to make is to explain basically the two most commonly available licensing models, the carrot and the stick licensing model, and discuss when they are available and how do they work. Okay. So first of everything, let's talk about the first case. The first case is the company Fractus. We founded in 1999. I have been a researcher and a scientist in the antenna field for 30 years now. And it was in 1994 where we created the first fractal antennas. That was purely research stage at the UPC in Barcelona. And in that time, which was about 6 years of fundamental research, we basically make experiments and tests and analysis on all new kinds of fractal and fractal related geometries that could be used to design miniature and multiband antennas. So it wasn't until 1999 that this technology hit the market. And it was after we got this acknowledgement by the scientific community that this was a technology with a huge potential. So in 1999 also we got this European Information Technology Grand Prize, and later on we were nominated to the European Inventor Award, and we were named Technology Pioneers by the World Economic Forum. So let's say that there was a consensus that this technology had a huge potential. This fractal-based antenna technology had a huge potential for the mobile market, and this is how we decided to create Fractus. I quitted the university after being tenure in 1999 with special permission to leave, and we founded the company Fractus together with other entrepreneurs, co-founder Ruben Bonet and other shareholders. We went through several investment rounds that funded the company with an total investment about $20 million as well. And the company started with a quite basic business model, which was, well, we had a technology for making miniature and multiband antennas, which were key for the mobile and the wireless industry in general. So our first business model was let's let's make products out of this technology. Let's make antenna parts, antenna components, and sell these antennas to the whole industry. However, we realized for several reasons that that business model was not successful enough, and we decided to complement that business model with a licensing model. So at some point after 9 years of the company, we decided to introduce this new business model into the company, the licensing business model. And as a result of that, the company was very successful, as we could license our technology to about the entire mobile phone industry, the entire smartphone industry. 10 years after founding the company, 99% of the mobile phones and the smartphones worldwide were using our technology, the technology for internal antennas, multi-band miniature internal antennas for mobile phones. So we were able to remove the external antennas that were initially in mobile phones. And that success came, however, through using, as we will see, the stick licensing model. Okay, so we had to enforce our patents through courts. In the year 2009, 10 years after founding the company took the decision to file a complaint in the Eastern District of Texas for patent infringement against 10 companies, 10 cell phone manufacturers, including Samsung, LG, BlackBerry, HTC, UTStarcom, Sanyo, Sharp, etc. So 10 different companies, and because of patent infringement. And well, it took about 2 years to litigate with some of them, 5 years with some others. But at the end, the outcome of that lawsuit was that all the 10 companies took a license from Fractus because they were using our patented technology in their devices. So that was the first example. A second well-known example of very successful technology company in the telecom business using licensing is Qualcomm. Qualcomm is known because being a leader in producing and selling chips for mobile phones. But in addition of that, they are a major licensing company. So about 1/3 of their margin in their business comes from licensing technologies, and they license their over 100,000 patents to the entire mobile industry, being a very, very successful licensing company. Okay. So 2 examples: Fractus, a small startup company based in Barcelona that has been licensing the entire industry. Another example, Qualcomm, a giant industry that has been licensing technology to the mobile market very successfully. Okay. So when talking about licensing, I think it's very important to realize that there are 2 very different business models available for licensing patents and technology, and some of them have their own submodels, as we have seen before. Okay, these 2 models are the carrot and the stick, and they are called the carrot and the stick because of the different business dynamics that are involved. In the carrot, basically, you want to convince clients to take a license on your patents and your technology because of the benefits of the technology and because of the potential benefits that the products of your client will have with your technology. While the stick is about threatening someone with your patents so that you will file a lawsuit, or actually will file a lawsuit if that client doesn't take a license because he's using already your patents. Okay. So regarding the carrot is the most common model for enabling technologies. That is, technologies that are at an early stage of maturity and of introduction to the market. I think that an important aspect of related to the current model is that, at least for the electronics and telecoms industry, is that licensing the IP alone is usually not enough to reach the market. And the owner of the IP is to be ready to bundle these IP rights together with other things, like technical support, training services, engineering services, testing services, so that everything together with the IP is used to convince the client to take a license on the IP. So the IP is one component of the whole deal, but not the only one. And in our experience, just selling the IP without this bundling of services is usually difficult. This is why because most of the times for these enabling technologies, it's better to create a startup and to embed the IP into a startup. So this startup is the one hitting the market because they are capable of delivering all these bundling services. Another aspect I would like to highlight is that, this is the adoption cycle of any innovation into the market, where at the beginning are only a few innovators taking the market, and then this grows following this kind of wave. It's important to realize that choosing the carrot or the stick is not always the choice. Most people would prefer to take the carrot as opposed to the stick, but the carrot works very well only in the early stages of introducing this innovation into the market. When the technology has been widely and broadly adopted by the market, there is no other option but to use the stick. The stick, no longer the carrot is needed, no longer the carrot is effective, but using the stick is the only model that at this stage licensing works most of the times. Okay, and that basically is my presentation. For anyone who would have more interest on these topics, I'm currently teaching technology and patent management at the public Polytechnic University of Catalonia in Barcelona. So everyone is welcome to Barcelona to take courses on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. We have one question for you, but before answering the question, I'd like to say that every new presentation brings new aspects to the table for our beneficiaries. We gain new insights. That's the interesting thing. For instance, in your case, it was so clear that also the big industry makes a lot of money from licensing of different types of technology at Qualcomm. This is not so much known, and the perception is that only the SMEs or the startups. So this was a very good example for people to understand that the revenues, considerable, sizable revenues, can be made from that, as also that you need the support of the. So the question is, if somebody can read the question, please. Yeah, did you have to take time off from your university duties to focus on Fractus?
Absolutely. As I was explaining, when we founded the company, I decided to leave the university, and I became, for 9 years, full-time an employee of the company. So I became the CTO and IPR director, and in addition to a board member and a shareholder of the company. But I had to leave the university. The university had a program for creating startups, the Innova program, and that helped me in living with the option to come back to the university after some time, and that's what I did after 9 years. I got back to the university, and now I'm teaching there, and I'm part-time there and part-time at the company.
Thank you, Carlos. In all presentations, we heard about IP strategy, IP portfolio, even a little bit more stronger was presented in the last presentation. So we understand, that you can't talk about licensing without referring, a lot to the IP and how it's protected and all the issues that you need the support, as Carlos said, possible litigation can start at very early stages. For all these reasons, our next speaker is the great addition that we need to have, and we have with us today. to talk about the IP component and the IP strategy. And for you to know, the European Innovation Council has signed an agreement with the European Patent Office, demonstrating clearly the importance of supporting our beneficiaries with the necessary knowledge, especially at the transition level, but also earlier or at later stages. So with that, I'd like to invite...
Sorry, Danos, sorry to interrupt you, because perhaps I will see that there are some questions already in the chat, but they will be answered, if not later during the panel, because the time is killing us. They will be answered and uploaded in our website. So sorry, just to clarify for the audience.
Because we need exactly to guide our audience and our beneficiaries to know the process. Thomas, Bereder, welcome. So the floor is yours. We're very much looking forward to hear about the IP component that is so tightly connected.
So thank you for the kind introduction. I'm happy to connect to the presentations that have already taken. I will elaborate on the success factors in licensing. I would like to focus on 4 key takeaways and provide links to case studies and further reading in general. As already mentioned, I'm with the European Patent Academy. That is the external training arm of the EPO. And the EPO is very eager to cooperate with EIC. So that's one of our priority partners. So I'm very delighted to be part of that. The experience with 2 target groups relevant for today's contribution are the research organizations and the businesses. And we, as the Academy, we cooperate with the EPO's Chief Economist Unit. And since 2017, we published a series of innovation case studies and conducted larger studies about IP commercialization. The first 2 key takeaways are resulting mainly from that work. Let's start with a bigger view on the topic. The graphic shows on the left the classical IP management pillars. I think in nearly all research organizations, this is well established. This illustration is combined on the right with the 4 main exploitation routes. Licensing, our main topic of today. It was already discussed, the assignment, meaning the selling of technology. In the US, for legal reasons that normally is not an option. In Europe, in most nations, it's open to the university to decide upon that. And in particular, in relation to spin-off creation, that often can make sense to assign a technology. And the 4th way to commercialize that is alliance, meaning strategic corporations. So at the universities where I've been working, there have been some institutes that had 3 state-financed researchers, and actually 100 or over 100 people were employed, and that strategic corporations with industry, and those had some exclusive components based on IP. But I would like to come up with a different case study, and that is Dermis Pharma. That is one of the case studies we have published on our website. You have the link here. This company was founded after they have gone through a process. And at the university, the research team, they have developed a technology suitable for treating open wounds. They teamed up with the technology transfer office. The goal was clear: license or sell the technology. But the reality was they didn't achieve the goal. So what was the alternative? They founded a spin-off. And the purpose of the spin-off, it's a little bit similar to the Fractus case study, but in a different field. The idea was then to have own products in the market. But when developing the technology further, then a new opportunity came across. And then actually due to an alliance, and the alliance in contract terms was established by an exclusive license agreement, was actually then the main success factor to introduce the products into the market. And the business model of the company then changed, and the company is focusing on R&D and licensing out of technologies. So what does that tell us? So coming to the first key takeaway, consider all exploitation routes. Don't see yourself fixed on one route. So even if you got trained in licensing, you love licensing, the market reality might be a different one. So be ready to pivot as required to adjust to the market situation that you have. So that's the first point. And as discussed with the organizers, I included several links that bring you further so that you have the opportunity to have a further read, because in the short presentation, we cannot go into all details. And we have, for example, published an IP teaching kit. The IP teaching kit includes an IP management part. And the slide that you see here, that was taken from there. We have e-learning courses about IP strategy, also recorded lectures about it. We have an article about IP transactions that is online, and everything is accessible for free, of course. So that is the first point. The second point, to come back to the already mentioned innovation case studies, we have published a series of those from different fields, different business cases, a broad variety. But to facilitate the access, we have created this graphic. So to make it more clear, what business cases are supported by licensing. And that goes very well together with the presentation of Carles, describing the carrot and the stick model. To some extent, it goes in that direction. And the first two that we are discussing, that the main motivation for licensing is getting access to technology. And the carrot model, that is, you want to get access to technology you otherwise would not have available. So you get access to patents, to know-how, to trade secrets, and so on. And that is illustrated in two case studies that we have published. These are technology transfer case studies. The one is Cubicure. That's a 3D manufacturing, 3D printing company, and in Austria. And Blue Brake in Italy, they have developed anti-lock braking systems, interesting for all the e-bikers. So these are the first two case studies. But what we also have, that is a case study in the ICT environment, a software company that swept in from France. There, cross-licensing happened between two small and medium enterprises, so that both were legally allowed to implement technology. So they had competing rights. And there it was actually about freedom to operate. So that's more the carrot, the stick model, because you would be able to implement a technology already with what you have, with the understanding that you have. But legally, you're crossing the field of others. So others have a patent, others have legal rights, IPRs, that you need to license in to be allowed to use it. Then we have the fourth category, that's about virtual commercial partner. That's already described. So that means Fractus finally decided not to sell the products by themselves, but to be the enabler, to provide the technology to others that then produce and implement. And in Dermis Pharma, it's the same. And the last model, that is when a company has its own products in the market, but there are opportunities that are not used within the company, meaning there is an option to sell technology like it was done by Phosphorex, which is not part of the core business model of the company, not required for their own products. In case of Phosphorex, it's a German company producing sensors for wind turbines. And in the case of Oxeon, it was about applications. So Oxeon is a Swedish company. They have developed novel textiles, and they have focused on certain application fields. And applications outside of the focus, they licensed out. And that, of course, created additional revenues. So in the later two cases, licensing is done mainly for creating revenues. So that brings us to the next key takeaway. And that is understand how licensing can support various business models. And that connects well what has been already said about IP strategy. Without an IP strategy, you cannot create such successes, although the strategy then needs to be adjusted. But you start with a plan what to do. You think about how licensing can support your business. And that is an important aspect. So again here, a cross-reference to an article that we have published that explains in much more detail what we have just discussed. So now coming to the next aspect, here another background helps to understand where I'm coming from. So that is coming from my own practice. So in the introduction it was mentioned that I have over 20 years of licensing experience. So I started as an inventor, became a serial entrepreneur, and started giving back by setting up an accelerator and later technology licensing office. And one thing that I have learned there is that it goes far beyond this basic understanding of a license. At the end of the day, you are aiming for a deal. And when you think about the deal, what is finally done, you provide technology, and on the left side you see those boxes, and this is the symbol. You put something into the box. That is what you then finally make available. For that you get a return. And in the presentations before, it was already stressed, and I think this is a very important aspect, that you have many options to define what you are licensing out. I'm a big fan of this approach to really think about what creates a win-win relationship. And the win-win relationship can only be done well if you have understood what is the business case and which of your IP and which part of your technology that you have that you as a licensor want, you're aiming to license out, which part of that is really needed for the business case so that you license out what is required. And then on the other hand, when it is about the gain, the remuneration for that, there are also many options to define what you will get, so that at the end of the day, you join forces for making a business case possible to implement that jointly in a corporation. And that was also already stressed, in particular by Carlos, that the thinking that you have a technology, you throw it over the fence somewhere on the other side, takes the technology, runs and commercializes and is successful. That does not happen all too often in practice. Normally it's a team sport, because the recipient of the technology, he might need a lot of help to further develop the technology till it's really market ready. And often not the first product that is launched is the big market success. Often it is the second generation of products. And those things need to be developed. And who is doing that? And therefore, my own experience is, based on what I've done before I joined the EPO, that nearly all licensing agreements that I closed for the universities, for startups, along with cooperation component. So to roll up the sleeves and do it together, creating the success. Of course, when doing the licensing transaction, you have, like here on this slide, many options, or many things that you need to include in a license agreement. I think it's a good practice to follow up with the recommendations. Many resources are out there to help you in defining that. But the most important aspect is, and that is key takeaway number 3, aim for win-win collaborations. And I'm stressing here win-win. So it's not about lose-win, you sacrifice something as a licensor, or win-lose, the licensee sacrifices something. It must be something that brings forward both parties. And that requires to really discuss the business case and to see how joint effort can make it possible, and to use all means to tailor the license agreements to the business use and the needs of the parties. So that is the takeaway number 3. Another aspect that we're coming now to the fourth and the last point, that is before we discussed about the transaction, meaning how to get the license agreement done. And that was also discussed in the former presentations. But what was also coming out clearly from the other speakers, that is, you have a period, a phase before. You prepare for the success. The success not suddenly happens. So you have to do something before. And then I think that was the very first presentation we had. Then the implementation phase is coming. That once the contract is signed, then you need to implement it. And for external person, this in the moment sounds very common sense. It seems to be very logic, but in practice, it often does not happen, because license agreements are a very tough process, because it's a partnering and you need to come together and you need to understand each other. You have a lot of legal aspects to consider. So it's a tough period. Normally, license negotiations are not done within days or within weeks. It can happen, but it's not the regular case. And when it goes longer and it takes some endurance, then once the contract is signed, all parties are relieved, and we have done it. and then they need to go back to their daily business. And then many things are not implemented as they should. That is a big point of many many contracts that have not foreseen that. And so I think the development phase and implementation phase, they need further attention. And we have here also support for that. One of the aspects that you do before, that is the assessment of the intellectual assets that you have. And we have a methodology developed or provided via a tool, but it's not the tool I'm promoting. I'm promoting the systematic that is used to evaluate the main points of a technology in the area of legal technology market. These are the main areas. In overall, you have 8 questions per area, and that sums up to 40 questions. And those questions are always relevant in all fields, either it's biotech or ICT. The answers are different, and the meaning of the answers are different, so that is clear. But it is a very good systematic that helps a lot to prepare in advance, already when you're developing a technology, to see what is relevant and where to improve and where do you stand and what do you have actually to license out. So that is a very good approach. And we also have an article about that is called stage gate model, where these aspects are more explained in more detail. So one of the last slides here to that point is also to consider all IP rights that are relevant for the technology. So coming from the EPO, of course, patents are a great instrument, so it's very important. But in my own practice, I have hardly signed any license agreement that was not combined with trade secrets, for example, and that added value for both parties. So I know that in the first presentation we heard that the university decided not to push forward trade secrets, but in my own practice at technical universities in Austria, on a mutual agreement with the researchers, it was possible to define some areas where trade secrets actually made sense for the researchers and for the licensees. So that brings us then to the last key takeaway. The pre- and post-licensing phases are important to overall success in licensing transactions and should be considered early on to make the success possible. So if you would need more information, all the links that I have cited are included on epo.org/SME. And together with partners like the Licensing Executive Society International and many others, we have created the High Growth Technology Business Community. And if you're interested in these topics and you want to stay abreast about about the publications that we have, the events that we organize, then please follow the LinkedIn page. And if you want to get in contact, I've also included my own LinkedIn page. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, for the very comprehensive presentation. And thank you for adding a component that was missing. We, in the first edition of licensing, we had, because we were working with only one sector, focusing on, we had the luxury to have some of the examples that you presented working in more specifically in the biotech sector, but it was very much needed what you presented today, like the freedom to operate, the win-win situation, and the pre and post licensing considerations. So that really ties up very well with the previous presentations, where the emphasis was most on different cases. We don't have any question, if I understand correctly, and we will need
one question. We have one question.
Where?
Can you please?
Yes. So the question is from Aurelian. What do you mean by licensing of trade secrets? Because what the secrets are linked to a strong protection of strategy? This is the last question in the chat.
Yes, so trade secrets are those things that so is that know-how that you have not published, that is not available publicly, and you can also license that. Of course, you need to take an extra effort to keep something secret. There are some legal requirements also for that, and it's also described in the IP teaching kit, for example. And it's a smart combination because when you decide about filing a patent, then finally the technology is published. So every application is published after 18 months. The challenge is that some technologies struggle in making it visible that your patent was used. So when you have a process, for example, and the end product of the process does not disclose how it was produced, then you have problems enforcing your rights. And therefore, in some cases, it just does not make sense to patent that part of the technology and publish it because you cannot enforce it. So an IP right that you cannot enforce easily becomes less worth or nothing worth. And you then might try to find a smart way to patent those technologies which you can enforce, where you can prove that your technology is used, and keep secret those parts where you are lacking that. And in addition, the license agreement will also benefit from that because in most jurisdictions, you can license a patent only for the duration, for the lifetime of the patent. Once the patent lapses, at least you have to consider that in the contract what happens with a lapsed patent. But the trade secrets stay. So just to give you a non-technical example, Coca-Cola is keeping a trade secret for over 100 years and still the owner of the trade secret and still can license and do everything with it. So that is our own IP right, and the combination makes in many cases perfect sense.
There are a couple of more questions, but it's better that they're discussed during after our break in the panel, if you don't mind. Anne-Marie, do you want to have a break of 5 minutes?
Yes, I think it's good for everybody to have a break of 5 minutes. So we can all stretch our legs a bit. And then we continue with the questions which have not been answered yet by the panelists now. But for now, I really want to thank all the speakers for their very interesting and rich insights. And then I look forward to the discussion that we will have in 5 minutes. So welcome back, everybody, to the second part of the session. So now we will have the panel discussion. So we will answer all the questions that you have. We would really like to cover the different domains so that we are talking, that the projects related to health ask their health related questions, the other ones, the ICT ones, ask their ICT related questions, and of course also the agriculture ones. But before we start with that, we have now one new person joining the panel. She replaces Alicia, who cannot be with us because she's in Vancouver. And that person is Lilian Volkamp. And I want to give the word to Lilian to shortly introduce herself and her experience in licensing so that we all know who she is and what are the type of questions we can ask to her. So Lilian, please go ahead.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, and thank you all for these inspiring presentations and for having me. Actually, I would like just to contribute with some ideas for the discussions, and I would refer to the food industry because this is closer to my current research topic. And as of the point of discussion today, is licensing a suitable exit strategy for the agri-food? Well, in my experience, I would say to startups, innovators following us today, yes, I think that this is definitely one good option. It is a win-win option, and that we could definitely consider that for, in my view, for two particular reasons related to the food sector. First of all, it enables you to continue to innovate while exploiting your IP as a revenue stream. Probably innovate is what you do best. So by licensing, you could always keep doing and doing more and better. The second reason would be the food sector is actually a huge current, feeding a huge current appetite for IP solutions. And for that, we need to put forward breakthrough innovative clean tech solutions for the food sector. It is a very hungry target for you as innovator, as scientists, and even more, this is a big market target that has particular features. We all know that the agricultural sector, particularly horizontal agriculture, brings a big share of CO2 emissions. We also know that it has relatively low barriers to entry, considering regulations. If you are proposing clean solutions, sustainable solutions. That brings me to another point that I would like to bring to the table of discussions today, which is innovators of the food sector could always innovate also in the way they partner. Partnering, for instance, with rural actors would bring to innovation in Europe amazing impact in terms of socio-economical and environmental for the rural economy. It is very meaningful at this point because partnering when you are a startup, it doesn't bring necessarily only solutions when you partner with big corporations. For instance, I examined very carefully and followed the trajectory of a startup in Oxford, which offered solutions for the coffee sector. And of course, being a crop that grows only in the tropical belt, the minimum viable product was tested with a cooperative in Rwanda. That brought to them an amazing amount of knowledge, not only to perfection and redefine what the solution was, but also to understand the target of the market they were aiming at and how to propose it in a suitable manner. Then the last key factor in Europe would be probably to think that rural agriculture in Europe is made out of 10 million farmers every day working to maintain soil fertility, forest, preserving the biodiversity there, bringing to our table fresh food and dairy products, normally processed with traditional methods and approaches. That would be an amazing and potential source of idea for innovators. I think that linking what is a novel, modern science with rural science would bring an amazing fresh air of possibilities of collaboration and perhaps a seed also to grow innovation ecosystem and technology transfer, knowledge transfer between universities and centers of research in rural areas of Europe. That, of course, could bring about ideas that could bring technology breakthrough. And at that point, one of my contributions today would be, this is a new area in which the conventional IP system is still working on and would be worth considering. Why? Because traditional knowledge, particularly that related to the conservation of genetic resources, which the rural areas in Europe are rich up to a certain extent, is not part at the moment of the conventional IP system. Protecting an eventual intellectual property that comes from traditional knowledge only today relies on sui generis systems. So bringing about this opening, considering that innovation coming from this kind of collaboration would bring an amazing impact and prosperity to rural areas and avoid exodus and further loss of this traditional knowledge, would perhaps through the question, is the conventional IP system in Europe prepared to help on that? Is perhaps the technology transfer and the knowledge transfer in Europe prepared to go and rescue this traditional knowledge? And is there a way in which rural areas can be the protagonist of the food sector of Europe in the future? I would stop there, and then perhaps we could elaborate on some of these ideas during the questions and answers and debate discussions coming ahead. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We need to get to the questions to start the questions and the discussion. The first question you want?
Yes. Lilian, thank you for bringing also this aspect of, I would say, local communities, traditional knowledge with really local IP into the question, which is not maybe something that can be scaled up exponentially like many inventors want. There's always this kind of power law which is behind some business models, but indeed it's also a very interesting aspect. I don't know if we will get around to discussing it in this panel because you bring a totally new subject, but it's certainly one which is very important to also keep in mind. And when anybody has something to say about it, then I would welcome that person to discuss this aspect with you. But the So as I said, for the panel, for this panel discussion, we really want to go into the different areas so that we cover all the domains that we have. And we received some questions already in advance of the webinar. And one would be, I think, for John, because it's on health. And the question comes from Akpeli Noordor, and he's from the project M-Cube. And he's doing an accelerator project. So that means he's doing a project which is close to the market already. And he asks, as a small company, how to promote the transition from a service provider relationship with a fee for service-based business model to a business development partnership with a larger biopharma company, where there would be another business model, which would be an upfront plus milestone plus royalty-based business model. I think that's also some of the models that you proposed. So how would they go from this fee-for-service business model to a real licensing model where different steps are defined? And how to avoid the risk of remaining trapped in the former model? John, would you have an answer to that?
I saw John 2 minutes ago. I'm sure he's with us, or
I'm here, but I was on mute.
Okay. Yes.
So for me, the business model is guided, from my perspective, my experience is guided by the product or the service. But well, the service is a product, and so so how do you? Well, first of all, how do you select the business model? Whether it's fee for service or more of a licensing model depends on what product you're making, and some products are suitable for one or the other. So if you want to migrate from one to the other, then you should be thinking about how to evolve the product. If you're doing some kind of testing service, then for drug companies, then that is more suitable for a fee for service type of model. If you want to go to a licensing, then you should be in parallel developing your own intellectual property such you could package it, metaphorically speaking, and it would have its own IP portfolio. Of course, thinking about all the issues we talk about, IP strategy and how do you evolve, competitive positioning, and then you would have a product. The product can be sort of the IP portfolio, the patents, the know-how, going back to Thomas's comments, all of that, and that would be something you would license and get those kinds of financial returns. So in summary, it depends on the product. If you want to migrate the model, if you want to change the model, then you also have to evolve the product and the offering.
Thanks a lot for your clear answer. Now I have a question on energy and materials, and perhaps my colleague Francesco can answer it if none of the panelists can answer it. But it comes from Thomas Ciamulski, and he's working on the project Fibritech or Fibritech. It's also an accelerator project, so close to the market, on energy and materials. And his question is that they are developing a new production technology for new eco materials. That defines the industrial manufacturing scenario for our licensing strategy. There is a growing industrial trend to secure eco future. So the questions that they have, well, one is very particular, how much revenue sharing versus upfront fee. I would think that is not a question that is easy to answer in general, but maybe the second one, the comparison of the pros and cons between contractual licensing only versus joint venture with the license as an in-kind contribution to the separate manufacturing company. So that is maybe an interesting question. What if you would do licensing only, or you would start a joint venture in the area of materials? Francesco?
Yeah, I can bring my example that I lived as a previous manager director of a startup where we licensed in a technology. The word was the one of small wind turbines. At a certain point, we realized that there was the need to have a certain know-how, so we looked around the globe and we found a company that was exactly doing or did what we were looking for. So to answer to these questions, the experience that we lived started with a partnership and evolved with a license. That means to answer the question, I think that it depends on the timing, but to license in something means that you also need to, in the case of a processing, or in this case of the material, you also need all the know-how required then to eventually manufacture it. So in my opinion, it's, if from the legal point of view, it's, let me say, it has got also sense to have only, for example, royalties on certain amount of materials that you can sell. On the other side, the know-how transfer to make this license in the case of a processing happen, it requires, in my opinion and in my experience, also a partnership. In the case that I lived, we partnered with this company, so we paid the know-how transfer and we licensed in based on a fixed royalties. And so the kind of partnership was a consultancy partner for the development and for bringing exactly all the technology inside our company. So to finish my answer, I really think that this is my experience, obviously, is in the clean tech, but I would say that normally, if we are speaking about processing, it's more obvious, in my experience, to have a partnership plus licensing more than the simple licensing.
Okay, and I see John also wants to add, but John, you have to unmute yourself again.
Yes, I wanted to add, and I'm emphasizing what was just said, is that, and also what Thomas said earlier, I don't think there's any license. So the question was a license only or joint venture, and I would argue that every license is a joint venture. And a partnership. There's no situation where you just throw a patent over the fence, to quote Thomas, and someone picks it up, and or even you sign a contract and that's it. That may almost never. So every licensing arrangement is a partnership. In that sense, it's a joint venture. You're tied at the hip for a number of years. You're tied to hip for contractual reasons. The contract always evolves. You need to amend it. There's changes. You're tied to the hip for technical, scientific reasons. You need to effectuate the know-how. There's often sponsored research coming back to the lab. If this is with a university, there could be consulting agreements back to the scientists in the university. There's postdocs and grad students who graduate, finish, and go off to the company. So it's always a partnership. It's always a joint venture if you want to be successful.
Thank you. Yes, that's indeed very clear. I see a question in the domain of IT, in particular artificial intelligence. So this could maybe be a question for Carlos. In relation to artificial intelligence, what is the recommended IP exploitation strategy? What are the differences between EU and US? Carlos, I don't know if you also have a view on AI, but...
Thank you, Marie, and thank you, Alessandro, for the question. Well, first of everything, there are differences between the US and Europe. In Europe, software as such is not patentable, okay, and you can protect some computer-related inventions as algorithms, as methods, but not as software as such. Mm-hmm. So in the US, it's easier because there is no ban on software patents. So in general, it's a new field. So there are a lot of things to be addressed in this area, and it's a surprising area. So There is not much that can be said, but the US for sure is going to be one of the main markets for artificial intelligence, and it's a preferred market for IP as well. So most of everything, my recommendation would be to focus your IP protection strategy in the US and then commercialization there as well.
Thank you, Carlos. The next question comes from Eva Kovatova. Is there any support that the EIC provides to EIC grant recipients in case someone infringed their IP? Legal costs to defend our IP can cause serious business continuity issues. I would like to refer this question to Thomas, because I believe he would be the best placed to know if there is any of such type of support.
I'm not aware of any European level support for litigation. But having said that, I know from my former practice that actually you should also think about approaching that in a partnership sense. So in most of the cases where I was confronted with that, partnering with others that have the expertise, that have resources, made very much sense. And also in the case that we had with Fractus, for example, Fractus would not have been able to do that without venture capitalists. So venture capitalists were backing the company to get through the difficult periods when enforcement of the IP rights were necessary. In my own practice, partly it was about competitors of those companies infringing the IP right that have been good partners in defending the technology. There are also some specialized investors that once there's proof for infringement, then they are ready to invest into the technology and the litigation that is required. And having said that, that is already assuming that enforcement at the court is required, but don't underestimate how much power you have in your negotiations. As a university, for example, when I was running the technology licensing office, I had cases where it was clear that the university will not start a legal battle. But on the other hand, the companies infringing, they also had no interest to get public notion that they are infringing IP rights of a university. Because, for example, they were companies traded at the stock exchange, and it can have also some influence on the value of the company when it becomes the investors become aware that the products on the market are infringing IP rights of others. So there are many ways to solve it. That is my main message. It is not a black and white thing. It's not if I don't have that amount of money on the bank account, I just can't enforce. That's absolutely not the case. You need to have a strategy, and you need to use the resources that are there, where you can also learn to better understand how IP litigation is done. We also have one article on the website, on our website, that is focused on the aspect of litigation, where Bruno van der Meulen, who was with Bird & Bird, who has 30 years of experience in litigation, and in particular also litigation for SMEs, for the small and medium enterprises, who summarized some of his experiences and gives some hints how to address the issue and how to enforce the rights. So without having EIC or EU money supporting the litigation, but finding a smart way to enforce your rights.
Thank you, Thomas. Danos would like to add something to that.
No, you gave a very good pass, Thomas, to discuss a little bit that the support so far by there was an SME fund in Europe that I'm aware of, and now EIC is exactly on the fees. When you apply, then there is support on the fees. But what is missing, and has become really clear, but there is no support on the litigation procedures, which can start very early. So I'm saying that because we need to think around that. On the translation for those countries that they have not signed the unitary patent is very important. On the outside EU applications, we need also to support because they're going to compete globally. And also on the expenses of the patent attorneys. My point is, and that is thanks to your contribution, that by supporting the fees of the applications for an SME, for a startup, this is less than 20% or 10% of the expenses that are needed. And sometimes litigation can start very early, once to our surprise, it's not only at the late stages. And the real expense is the cost of the patent attorney, the specialized patent attorney who's going to write the patent claims, which are different. It's different training in the agro sector, in the chemical sector, in other sectors. So all these things, it's something that we need to consider as EIC and General Energy Commission, what we can support that goes beyond supporting 50 or 30% the fees of the application.
John, I think you raised your hand.
I did. I just wanted to add a very small comment that in some countries, the US in particular, there are specialized firms that will take on litigation expenses on a contingency basis as well. So they are, of course, they're very selective in which patents they take on, but that is one more option.
Okay.
And
Thomas, you wanted to add something, Thomas.
Exactly. So I think it's also important to stress that the fact that fees can be paid, that for that support is that also because some of the infringers, when they know that their IP was filed by research organizations, they wait for the 30 months. You know, when from priority filing till you have to decide about nationalization, you have the 30 months. And this is a period which most universities, research organizations can afford, where the technology transfer offices have the money for. And then afterwards, it becomes more expensive. And for companies infringing those rights, the problem is solved, you know, when the patents are not extended, you know, not nationalized, when the fees are not paid and the IP rights lapse. So already the fact that you can finance that already brings them into a more difficult situation, keeps up your right. And you know, the point is that normally from the time when you file a patent till a product is in the market, it takes its years. So in most of the cases, so statistics show that the revenues, it's averaged over several disciplines, but normally the revenues come after 7, 8, 9 years. Then it's becoming a big topic. And then it's also more risky for companies to still infringe the rights, because then it becomes costly if you are sued for infringement and so on. And if the IP comes into the wrong hands, in the hands of someone who can enforce the rights. And that is also leverage in new negotiations. So, so my point is that having financing for the IP is prerequisite and is absolutely important and cannot be overestimated how relevant it is for that aspect.
Thank you, Thomas. Now we move to a different topic, and it's a general question, but I would like to ask it to Xana in the agriculture business, just to also talk a little bit about agriculture. So what are the standard approaches to determine reasonable royalties as part of the license agreement? Is the 25% rule most standard? Xana.
That's a difficult one.
Yes.
But of course.
Well, I can talk from my experience, and from my experience, there is no standard rule, especially because we need to take into account that probably each innovation, each technology, product, whatever, is going to be in a different development stage. Yes, so I don't think that we can take that as a rule, and also we cannot think that, for example, a product for the pharma sector or a product for the ag sector or the food sector is gonna be able to stand the same quantity of royalties. So what I would say is that is more a case by case. Probably you can find some information depending on your innovation. If you are moving more on a single digit or a double digit royalty, depending on the product and the stage of development. But usually, if you are very early on the development, you will probably move more on the single digit than the double. And in order to understand where you are, you also need to think how much is still needed to do and how much investment is still needed to do, and then size the market. Okay, you need to know the market, and it's not a question that it can answer only your potential licensee. You should have that information to be able to contrast that information with the licensee. Because of course the potential, the projection of sales that a product like yours or technology like yours can have will help you to establish that royalty range. In any case, when there is no way to know, you have to you can try to use also consultants. Of course, there is specialist consultants everywhere, and you can find there also some help, because at least in the ag sector, it's not that easy that the agreements are public in order to check them. But if not, I mean, just you need to have some information around and then throw a number and negotiate. But it will arrive a moment that you will have to do it and stick to that you decided to.
Thank you, Xana.
I would like to add something, if possible, to this question.
Yes,
I think it's a very relevant question, and I agree with Shana that whether something 20% doesn't need to be 25% doesn't need to be a magic rule. And there are a couple of papers that published by the Licensing Executive Society and the magazine Nouvelles that review several licensing contracts and what are common royalties for several industries, and that's quite an interesting source of information. But at the end, as Shana was mentioning, it's a matter of negotiation. However, one thing that is more relevant even than the royalty rate discussion is where do you apply the royalty to? For instance, if you have invented a technology for aircraft engines, okay? Do you apply the royalty to the engine or to the whole aircraft? That's the question of the royalty base. What is the royalty base? And that's even more relevant than the question on the percentage. And that depends on every case and also on the scope of your IP and how essential is your IP in that market. But that's something that needs to be taken into consideration as an essential part of your licensing strategy.
Yeah, and just to add to what Carles said, and thinking on the royalty, there is, and I was mentioning that in some of the slides, which is at that stage of your development as company or research group or technological center, what is also more relevant, because depending on how long the development it is, the royalty is an important part. But what about upfront payments? What about milestone payments that can come closer? Is a revenue that can come sooner? And if you are in a startup, for example, funding is not usually that's possible to have it so easily. So I think it's the milestone payments, for example, and the upfront payment is something that is really relevant to negotiate. Okay, and there, depending on the stage of development of your product or your technology, you have another card that you can play, and this is also linked to the feasibility of obtaining fundraising. Okay, because VC investors, for example, will look at these kind of things is in the agreements. If it's only royalty, if it has also other components that can bring revenue before, all that is important. Look. All that is important to the aspect of analyzing the royalty percentage plus all the other components.
Thank you, Xana. I see that Thomas wants to add something to this, and then I would like to move to a next question.
But please, very briefly.
Okay, so very briefly, the basic thinking of the 20% rule is a good one, although the rule as such is oversimplification. And it's a good one because it's about thinking that you can get the share of the revenue that is made. You know, that's the thinking. And that includes what Xana said, when there's a lot of investment on the licensee side, that reduces, of course, the outcome for the licensee. And so that must be factored in. And coming back to my point that I made in my presentation, that was negotiate a win-win cooperation, and that means laying the cards open. When you understand the business case of your licensee, then you can find easier a fair license fee that is fair for you and fair for the licensee. Because if that does not work, then there is not enough motivation on both sides to really push forward a successful cooperation. So it must be something that is good for both. And I had many cases where we had to renegotiate the license fee, the royalty rate later on, because we have seen that the market is developed differently from what we expected.
Yeah.
If I might, I know we're over time, but this is a very important question. Could I add my own few cents as well for 1 minute? And we've covered all the material. I just wanted to sort of provide a small, very perspective. 25% rule is something that, you know, empirically is out there, but I want to make sure that the EIC grantees, you know, think of it in the right context, besides the other points. That would be a royalty rate one may receive for a finished product. Like if you have a drug and you took it all the way to FDA approval, then and then you hand off to a large pharma do distribution, then you could expect and receive along with other financials a royalty rate of, let's say, 25%. And then it's important to note then you work backwards. If you're 10 years away from FDA approval, then you can think about your royalty rate. So what is it? It should be probably single digit. So that rule can be applied, but only for final approved products. And then if you're very early, just move backwards.
Thank you for making this point. Yes.
Yeah.
So the next question I would like to ask to Lilian. And the question comes from Giovanni Melle, and he asks, at what stage a company at an early stage of development should start thinking about IP protection of its products? So how do you see that in the UK and in the agriculture sector? Lilian.
Sure. The most important thing is that the patent complies with the patenting requirements. So it has to be novel, innovative. It could also has the capability to be scalable industrially. And if you have the technology transfer on your side to provide you with the right advice, it is always better, because they would know which kind of potential would you have in the market to do so. And at the time this is determined, then they would probably advise you on whether to take the decision to go ahead and have an attorney doing so for you, or whether you should work still on the product, on the solution, to get it to comply more comprehensively in the requirements for patenting that are basic.
Okay. Is there anyone who would like to add to that?
I would like to make a comment on that if we are on time. So of course you cannot patent something that is not patentable, or you don't have enough information for the complete invention. but the recommendation is that you want to patent as soon as possible, as long as you get to know how to make the invention, even if you haven't completed the research. Okay, and here the chemical fields, pharma fields might be a little bit different from telecoms or mechanics or other fields. Okay, but in general, waiting at the very end is a mistake. Okay, but because then it's too late. Okay, so as long as you get to know what you have in your head of how the invention will be like, and you can describe it in a way that it's complete enough, you are ready to file a patent.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think we have answered all the questions in the chat.
See that Shana raised her hand, and also Thomas.
If there is just 1 minute to add to this last question.
Yes.
I'm, in my view, is not so much about the patent filing, because it's about the strategy. Might be that you're going to file a patent, or might be that there is any other type of protection. But what I would recommend is for sure to either take advice or devote some specific time, depending on if you have it inside your organization or not, or if not, you have to look for it outside. But to be sure that you invest resources on defining the strategy at the same time that you advance on the development of the technology or product. Not leave it as a separate piece that doesn't have anything to do with the research and development, because it's not like this, and then it's going to be late and you're going to do it in a wrong way. So you need to take it with the same importance as the market analysis. Think where you are going to be producing, where you are going to be selling, and who are going to be your clients. So you need to take it as a piece of the whole strategy, and don't forget about it until you really have finished your research. I am a little bit with Carlos there, that probably is not going to be always the best moment, but it has to arrive a moment that you file it, or you decide how to protect it in order to not miss the opportunity.
Thank you, Xana.
Thomas.
Just to add to that, in particular what Carlos said, I think it's important to know what is the prerequisite, and he stressed rightly how important it is to have enough information that you get a strong patent, because only a strong patent is then a good basis for a licensing case, etc. But I would also add that some preparatory work should also be done, because most research organizations go for a cost delaying strategy when filing patents. That means you buy your first priority year, and then, as mentioned earlier, in overall you have 30 months till the nationalization comes, and you have increasing costs regarding what you have to pay for patent attorneys, the fees at the patent office, and etc. So the costs are then running, and you know that in advance, and you have a defined time frame for your commercialization efforts. And knowing that, I think it's important that you have done some preparatory work, and in some cases it might make sense to delay a little bit the filing of the patent when you are sure that the competitors are not already on the way to find something similar and what they would then file earlier, just to be ready for running the commercialization efforts in time, in line with your budgets, in line with your planning. And so we are always coming back to the same point. Have an IP strategy, have a vision how the commercialization can happen, because then it's like drilling a tunnel, you know, from both sides. On the one side, you know that what you need to file a strong patent, but on the other side of the tunnel, you see what the market needs, what preparatory work is required from that side, how the market functions. And then you can combine that in a smart way, and also make sure that you get the claims that you need for the commercialization, that the right claims are there for your products, that this is then really covered, and that is defined in the claims. And for that, you also should have some understanding of the market and the products and services that are derived. So it's a combination of that, and therefore the player for having an IP strategy, and based on the IP strategy, then you derive a filing strategy. And then you know what are the essential triggers. Then you find all the questions that are there that first need to be answered before you file.
Lillian, I think that you wanted to make one last remark.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And I think that is crucial as well, that when you start preparing, the most important thing is that you trust whoever is going to be the one you are going to disclose. This is a very, very important pillar of the process right at the beginning, and disclosure could compromise or not the overall process of patent protection. So that's why I mentioned technology transfer support is crucial, because you would know that you can trust to whoever you are relying on the protection cycle to advise you, and to trust that the disclosure is properly done.
Thank you very much, Lilian, and all the other speakers. I would like now to give the word to Danos, who will give some concluding remarks on the whole panel discussion. Danos, please go ahead.
Thank you, Marie, for chairing efficiently and effectively the questions. We still have 112 people with us, so let me see if I can make my final rules before it falls down, 100. Licensing has not been a strength for EIC, and we are determined, with your help, if you have no objection, to make it one of the areas that we will gradually excel in the future to the supporting our beneficiaries. There is a clear need for that, no doubt. So we want to do this, and we hope to count on you from now on different possibilities and collaborative actions to increase the knowledge and reinforce the knowledge and the competences of our beneficiaries in the so crucial and vital licensing. What I heard today is that, for instance, it was from John, the fact that there is a dedicated fund at the moment where we have an EIC fund. One of our DGs, DG here, launched a new fund. So now we have a dedicated fund that is for one lab. So these are new and interesting insights. I also heard from Alicia a lot about the licensing models, and that there is not a technology transfer office, but a technology licensing office. These are all things for us to consider, and if we go that direction, we need to be able to have all those, the possibility also to be able to develop such we don't have in the arsenal of EIC this kind of services, although we very much focus on the commercialization of that. I heard from Zana that the co-development deal can go with a commercial deal. That was a very interesting part, and the different types of deals. We've been discussing with Anne-Marie about the different types of deals, and Zana's presentation made that very evident and very, very clear. From Thomas, I heard about the freedom to operate and the strategic cooperation with the industry is very important, and all this win-win. So these are just a collection of some insights, key insights, and also that I can still recall. I'm sure you're all tired, but if you ask me, if we want to continue on strengthening the competence of EIC in license, I would say absolutely yes, full power, and we're counting on you. But if you ask me what's going to be the content of the third edition, I can't answer to that. And I believe this is going to grow, and this is going to be next year, whether it's going to be even more targeted on what sector and all that with your help. I'd like to thank for the organization, Robert and Jenny and Manuel, right, who supported that, Anne-Marie for the chairing, and all of you have stayed for 3 hours almost, over 100 people watching us. A great big thanks to all of you.
And of course to the panelists who have also spent 3 hours with us and with all of you. Thank you very much for all your insights. Also, all the links that you had in your slides with cases and courses, and I think it's very rich material for all the participants. We will also publish this recording so that people who couldn't be here, that they can also look at it. And I hope this will be indeed a very useful resource for our projects. We would also like to hear feedback from the projects. If you would have any tip on additional things you would need, please send it to us. You know, because what we try to do is really to bring to you the knowledge that you need to make the right deals in the future. So thank you very much all, and hope to be in contact with you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Just excuse me to put one last step, just for the organizational side. Thank you for all the patience that you had, for the little setbacks that we had. Thank you very much for the speakers